is my pleasure to have our guest today, Dr. Goran Bozinovic, who is cultivating the next generation of scientists through an interesting organization that he runs, and he's going to tell us about that in a minute. But let me give you a brief bio about Goran. His research expertise is in developmental and evolutionary biology, toxicology, and genomics. So he's really looking at problems from all different lenses. And he's affiliated with UC San Diego, the Division of Biology, as well as San Diego State University Graduate School of Public Health. So he gets to bounce between institutions. But he is the mastermind, along with, I learned, some graduate students behind the Boz Institute, which is a nonprofit whose mission is to advance research, improve ecological and human health, and cultivate future scientists and community leaders. So this exciting program is offered year-round to pre-college students through a partnership with UCSD Extension. So welcome, Goran. I'd love to have you say a few words, and then we'll just get going on the questions.
Well, thanks for having me, Sarah. I appreciate the opportunity to share this vision a little bit and the way we do science that is a little bit different than what students are usually used to in their early kind of academic development. So this is a nice platform to share some of the thoughts and have a discussion about it.
Well, great. We love this conversation. We've had other guests on the show that are very interested in developing future scientists. So we love to hear everybody's take on this and learn from each other. So can you tell us a bit about how the Boz Institute got started?
Yeah, it's a kind of a interesting story. It came from a part frustration, part need to disrupt the system a little bit. I guess I've been at UCSD for about 12 years now, and I'm a faculty biology department, and I have a lot of students teaching technical laboratory courses and some lecture courses. And I realized that oftentimes when their plan A doesn't work out, which is usually a medical school or graduate school, oftentimes they're stuck and they don't know how to proceed. And it started to really kind of bother me that students were not aware of other opportunities in science, which is very diverse, right? And when it comes to opportunities, my wife at the time was also running a Biochemistry Institute, a really large organization in San Diego that partners with the academia and industry and life science companies. And she was kind of nudging me to try to change the system. I had a vision of how I wanted to do the science education, but I didn't really have a means. And then we started talking to people.
Mm-hmm. So how long ago did you start?
We started about 3 years ago. The idea was to try to take a non-academic route, but I ended up, out of all places, in a meeting with UCSD Extension, which is a little bit of a different operation than a main campus. They're, a little bit more business oriented and a little bit more nimble, and they listened to my kind of a broad vision, and they said that this aligns to what they're trying to do in their programs as well, and they became our biggest supporter, and this is how the partnership started. It took about a year to materialize it, to move into the lab space and start executing programs, but they have been a fantastic partner since we started. And, it's been 3 years going pretty strong. So we're extremely fortunate.
That is interesting. It's great to hear when those public-facing arms of the university embrace projects like this out in the community. Yeah, building bridges. So tell us about how students are identified and selected to participate in the program, and how many kids you have.
Sure. So up to date, we served about 300 students in the program. Program is a little bit unusual because it doesn't use the metrics that a traditional education system does, particularly in sciences. We try to get students engaged in all aspects of a research and have them participate in the authentic research so they can be authored on a manuscript. So we're using a little bit more of the metrics that are used post, I guess, undergraduate academic experience. Students right now come through mostly through UCSD pre-college program. The hypothesis is that you can take students at the very early age with very limited if any, science fundamentals, and if you put them in a different type of environment and motivate them to actually solve the problems when they're not pushed to acquire grades and work the system so they can just perform for the grades, but they're really solving problems as a team, and support them throughout the process, that there's going to be a little bit more of a long-term, better outcome for everybody involved. So right now they come from a UCSD extension program. However, Boz, as a nonprofit, has partnered with several local organizations, and we're making custom programs for underserved and underrepresented students as well.
So is it predominantly later high school kids, or are you capturing them earlier?
Yeah, that's so we wanted to do the proof of concept with the pre-college, with high school kids, mostly juniors actually, because they're still not as committed, I guess, and I find them very talented and open-minded. So this was a good hypothesis testing for us. We have plans and have experimented a little bit with the different cohorts as well. With the adults, we want to do the program with the teachers as well, with the people transitioning from one career to another. But right now, the focus is mostly for pre-college with the pre-college kids, particularly the ones who don't usually have opportunity to have access to these kind of programs.
That is terrific. And so 300, wow. So you are running year-round. Did I read that correctly off your website? So
yes, this is a year-round program that offers the diverse courses that are all project-based or research-based. And the idea is really to immerse students in all aspects of research, from observation all the way down to biostatistics and bioinformatics, and writing the manuscript and trying to submit a peer-reviewed manuscript to a pretty competitive journal and have their name on a paper.
Wow, so those are big goals.
Yeah, it's sometimes a little too ambitious, I guess. You know, it's a little bit of a trial and error. Luckily it's been a more trial than error so far, but you know, it's a steep learning curve, and we have a lot to learn. But it's been the system has been working. It needs some adjustment, obviously, and sometimes we're a little too ambitious, and then we'll learn from it. But yes.
Well, but that's, in my view, social entrepreneurship at its best, right?
Thank you.
You're fine-tuning as you're going along, creating new things for participants. So tell us, the students, when they're selected to be in the program, I mean, before we went live, you were telling me you're in a room adjacent to the laboratory. Where are you located? Are students coming to that lab, or do you have partnerships with faculty at these other institutions? So how are they actually mentored?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the lab is actually run mostly by graduate students. So each graduate student has a research program. I was very privileged as a graduate student to work on a science that was really dear to me. I had an advisor who kind of let me loose, and she allowed me to pursue really the science that I wanted to do, which is not a very common scenario for a graduate student. And that really changed my attitude about involving students into the work. So most of the projects here are student driven. I support them throughout it. And then the whole idea is to introduce our incoming students to 4 or 5 different diverse projects so they can intuitively engage into something that makes more sense to them. I noticed that students tend to take a lot more ownership of the project if the project is not forced on them, but they actually have a choice. So we try to run a pretty diverse lab. It's a very non-traditional lab where we use a lot of different species. We test different hypotheses, and the idea is to introduce students when they enter the program to 3 or 4 different projects so they can choose what they want to engage in. And then from there on, it becomes kind of a pretty elaborate process from the beginning, from observation, where the students are part of the building the hypothesis, designing the experiments, executing experiments, collecting data, analyzing, and then working on both written and oral presentations, informally, formally, and then working on a manuscript. So
it sounds like graduate school encapsulated.
They do graduate level work as a high schoolers without having a lot of conceptual knowledge how even to design a statistically responsible experiment. And that's the hypothesis. That's what we wanted to see. Can we start from scratch and actually kind of ride the entire process if given enough time and different metrics, right?
Well, it sounds like you're onto something. And can you tell us, you've mentioned you've had quite a few students in a short span of time, but are there a couple of stories that stand out in your mind as students you've worked with that have gone on and have gone to college and seized this opportunity in science?
Right. So yeah. So quite a few stories. One is that when we started our first cohort in the summer of 2019, we had 3 different projects going on at the same time. And one of the I think there were about maybe 30 students or so in a program in person. And one of the projects was in a partnership with National Park Service looking at the endangered plants on their site. And there were 3 students in the project because it was a plant biology. The other 2 projects were a little bit more, I wouldn't say popular, but one was a neurobiology project. So it had a little bit of a kind of a human health component to it. So we had only 3 students in this one project. One of them, out of 3 students, 2 of them stayed with a lab as volunteers. One of them was an author, co-author on a paper in the Ecology and Evolution journal. The other one just won the scholarship, national scholarship for college, and then I made her perform. She's an accomplished violinist, so I traded her for the letter of recommendation. She had to play a violin for everybody in a lab, and we were really treated with a fantastic performance. So this was a lot of fun. So they're both still here, and both of them are authors in a second paper, which was submitted to scientific reports. And that paper is about prevalence and trends of ADHD pre-COVID. And it's more of a statistical kind of a dry data science. So we're just happy to have them both in the, stay with the lab.
Wow, sounds like lots of different avenues that they can go on, but I'm sure just the whole notion of opening their eyes to this possibility of a career doing these different types of science as opposed to, say, medicine, as you mentioned at the beginning. Actually, you saying that triggered a memory that I remember being one of the few biology majors who wasn't going to medical school, like on purpose. But it struck a lot of my peers at the time as odd as to why I would be interested in biology if I wasn't going to med school. But,
right.
Yeah.
Right. We still support, we support students. Yeah, I have graduate students who aspire to go to medical school after they finish their work too. So we honor that. And we have several projects that really cater to students' interests. We have one volunteer just recently joined from UCSD who is working on a neurobiology project because she wants to, continue and go to medical school. Focusing on neurobiology. But you're right. One of the goals is to show students all the other possibilities that are out there besides a traditional path of going to medical school or vet school. Yep.
Yes, and if the last year of the COVID-19 pandemic has taught us anything, it takes all kinds of scientists and brains on a problem to present solutions.
And students are becoming more and more aware from a kind of an earlier age, and it's been, I don't know if you can talk about any silver lining or anything like this, but I think people are becoming more aware of this systemic effort, how many people actually go into the process of simply just developing a vaccine, right? So it's been educational for a lot of us.
I bet, and you're doing it in real time. It's pretty cool. So let's see, in a couple of weeks, I believe we are going to have a guest from your program on our show. So we're looking forward to meeting that student. I believe his name is Natalie, who can tell us from her perspective about what it's been like to be in the program. So we'll get both voices, which is pretty cool to look forward to. I'd love your comments in our final minutes on how the present moment of living in pandemic times and access being limited to labs and that kind of thing has changed how you're doing the program or the kinds of projects students are working on.
That's a really interesting question. We were a little bit concerned because our model pre-pandemic was in person, and it's invaluable. We love having students here, and there's a different type of engagement in person versus virtual. So once the COVID hit, we started becoming a little bit more resourceful. We offer a virtual research immersion program that created some opportunities to reach students that we usually wouldn't think of partnering with. We even did an interesting international cohort with underserved students from San Diego combined with the students from Ghana. And the reason for that was I wanted to test how well we can execute the program. But there is a cultural diversity, a little bit of a language barrier, definitely some internet infrastructure and technical problems. And this is one of my favorite courses that we did. The students actually presented to a panel of professional scientists and academics at the end of the program in a formal seminar. And we had mixed teams from people on a different continents working together, and it ended up being one of the probably most rewarding experiences at the Institute.
Wow, and I bet that'll be an experience your students will never forget.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun for everybody. My staff, when I told them what we were doing, they were a little bit, I wouldn't say concerned, but a little, you can see their brain spinning, how are we going to execute this, but it worked really well, and we had a lot of fun.
Those are great stories to hear right now as to how digital technology has connected us during these times and made new friendships that perhaps the hardship wouldn't have otherwise revealed. So I like that. We'll go with silver lining.
Yeah.
Well, we're in our last few moments here before my timer goes off. I didn't tell you I'd started it, but I did. So I'm going to tell our audience that I sincerely hope that you'll take a minute to go look at the Boz Institute online. It's B-O-Z as in zebra, Boz Institute. They have a great website that explains the program in more detail. There's some wonderful pictures of students doing the work and some shots in the lab. So here goes the timer. Definitely encourage all our viewers to stop by your website, take a look, and follow along. So I want to thank you very much for taking the time today to tell us the story of this. Wish you every success, and we look forward to talking to Natalie in a few weeks.
Thank you for the opportunity. It was a pleasure to be with you today. Thanks.
All right, everybody, we will see you next time. Thanks for stopping by.